Great. Okay. Hi, people on the recording. Welcome. So we are all together members of a Peace Forum network. It's a fairly informal group thus far, but I'm just going to share my screen here, so I feel like the visuals really help. We have quarterly meetings and some other conversations in between. This is our first sort of public event as a group, but we're just a range of different fora. PeaceCon is a member. We have, I'm just going to show you, we're going to flip across a couple websites. We have PeaceCon. Today we have Mohammed Kandil from the Oswan Forum. We have Nick Foster from the Caux Forum from Initiatives of Change. Unfortunately, our speaker Anya from FriEnt and the FriEnt Peacebuilding Forum was not able to make it due to a last-minute family emergency, but sends her regards. But we do also partner with FriEnt, and then my organization is the host of something called the Geneva Peace Week. So I just wanted to give that representation to explain a little bit more about who we are and why we're here today, which is to have a bit of a discussion, really. Those of you who came in first heard I said we've chosen the meeting format as opposed to the webinar format, and you're very welcome to turn your cameras on once we get to the discussion part, because we're here really just to have a conversation. We as a network are really at the nascent stages of figuring out how we collaborate. We want to talk today about what Peace Fora contribute to peace, and also see a little bit of where we overlap with that, but it's really about how we might collaborate and what our sort of collective impact is. But before we get there, and before I introduce our speakers a little bit more formally, we would love to get to know you a little bit. So we're going to do a bit of an experiment with the poll function. I am going to put a couple of options in the chat. And you're going to get to choose an option A, B, C, or D. So A is I organize Peace Fora or peace events. So maybe you work for a peace building organization. B is I more attend events. I think most of you would qualify as B, as you are currently attending PeaceCon. C would be both. That would be me. I'd fall into that category. And D is other, because, you know, why not have an other? So I believe you can see this. Maurice, tell me if the poll isn't open. Oh, it is open. I'm seeing responses coming through. This is exciting. So I'm just going to give you a minute here. And maybe once you've voted in the poll, if you'd like to introduce yourself in the chat, we'd also love to know who you are and what brings you here today. So I'm just going to give this maybe another 30 seconds or something. Panelists, I don't know if you can see the poll, but do also feel free to participate if you would like to. So we have at least a couple of votes in the A category. And once again, once you're done completing the poll, please do feel free to take a second to just type a quick introduction in the chat. We'd love to know who's here. Just going to give it another moment. Cool. All right. So can you see the poll results? I assume, yes. We have a 70% response rate. That's not too bad. So we have we have 3 out of the 12 of us are organizers. I'm assuming that's us as presenters. We have more attendees of Peace Fora in the audience, and then we have a both. Okay, so this just helps us sort of orient who we're talking to here. So the rest of the session is going to unfold like this. For about 25 minutes, 30 minutes, I'm going to interview our speakers. I'll be introducing them, and we'll be hearing from them a little bit more, digging in. We will then open it up for a group discussion, and I have endless questions prepared for our speakers, and actually questions for you, our audience. But please do feel free to note and pose your own questions. Feel free to type them in the chat as we go along, or we can have an open discussion and you can actually take the floor with your mic later. And then finally, we'll wrap up with some closing thoughts from our speakers. So now we come to our speakers. Hello, welcome you all. Thanks for making the time to be here today. I know for a couple of you it's lunchtime, a couple of you it's dinner time. We are here during meals, and that is exciting nonetheless. This is a topic that we as a group have been discussing for a while now. So it's exciting to discuss it in an actual forum. We are being recorded, which means maybe we're going to be committed to what we talk about today. Let's see. So Liz, if it's all right, I'll start with you. So for those of you who don't know, which I hope you know by now, Liz Hume is the Executive Director of the Alliance for Peacebuilding. You are a conflict expert with more than 20 years of experience in this line of work, and you've graciously created space for us in the program at PeaceCon to have this conversation. Thank you. But I wanted to start with you to ask your take on how do peace fora like this contribute to peace? And maybe we can get a little bit more specific. What about PeaceCon? How does PeaceCon contribute to peace? Over to you.
Sure. This is a really great question because somebody started them, these conferences, and they just have continued and taken on a life of their own. So I want to thank Annika because it was, last year, I can't remember when it was last year, you reached out to a bunch of us and said, hey, should we get together and talk? And it's frightening that we hadn't done that before. So I want to first just say thank you. And we've, had discussions now about that. Okay, so the question was, how do they contribute, and specifically PeaceCon? Okay, so this is my opinion, but I'd love to hear other people's as well on this, and also what we could be doing better. But one, they energize the community. I come off PeaceCon always an incredible passion, and I think a lot of other people come away with a lot of energy, and it's really reinvigorating. I think that's one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is it is a way we talk about it, to collaborate. It brings people together, and they're able to meet. You're making connections. I know so many people who have said to me, oh, I got a job when I was at PeaceCon, or I got together with I met this other organization, and now we're partnering together. So I think there's a lot of that. It's obviously the learning part, right? The learning. You learn so much, and you're able to share. Because it's one thing our peace building as a community doesn't do well. We don't share very well. I say this a lot. My husband's in the health field, and if they don't publish what they do, somebody else will publish it, and we don't. So that's why I think conferences like this or PeaceCon are so critical, because they fill that hole or that gap of what we don't do well. So I think that those are some of the important pieces. PeaceCon specifically, I think does all that. And I think we really try to push the policy and advocacy piece on it. A lot of times we're speaking to very specific audiences. We make sure we bring in the policymakers. We'll publish things after on it. And push that. So, if you see, we'll have people come in from the UN and the US government, for example, we are pushing an agenda, whether it be, like implement the Global Fragility Act. It puts a little pressure. Also, COVID, it's not just a second order issue. Where's the money? Both from the so there's also a policy and advocacy, and we're able to put some of these folks on the spot a little bit. So I think that that's an important piece it plays. I think that's really what I, sort of in what I'm thinking around it. But I want to hear what other people have to say. And also, if we can talk a little bit about the failures, and also, and how do we do it better and collaborate more. So I'll stop there.
Yeah. And I'm going to be posing this question to everybody, also people in the audience, because this is really the key, right? If we can't get existentially clear about why we exist, then why are we doing what we're doing? So
and if we can't work collaboratively and collectively together when we're telling everybody that to do that, that's a little ironic, right?
Absolutely. Yep. I really agree with that. I think it's an interesting, the Peace Forum Network is a really interesting group because we're all coming from very different places, very different climates. Councillor Kandil, I'm going to come to you next. You're the Deputy Director General at the Cairo International Center for Conflict Resolution, Peacekeeping, and Peacebuilding. So already a very different context from DC, very different climate. I mean, we're all working for peace in a sense, but in very different ways. So for those of you who don't know, the CCCPA is an Egyptian public agency that specializes in training, capacity building, research in the fields of peace and security. And it's also the host of the Oswan Forum, which is another in our network. So Councillor Kandil, you have a very innovative model at the Oswan Forum that allows you to operationalize the outcomes of your forum. So when we talk about, as Liz talked about, that sort of those advocacy and policy pushes, you've really structured them, you've systematized that. So can you tell us a little bit more about the Oswan Cycle, as you call it, and how you operationalize outcomes?
Well, thank you, Annika. It's a pleasure to be here and for this very important practice. I mean, to understand better how can we make this peace forums more operational with a good impact on peace building. So I'll go first with the history of the Aswan Forum. The Aswan Forum was launched in 2019 during the Egyptian presidency of the African Union. At that time, we were asked to be the executive secretariat of the Aswan Forum and to lead this initiative. And we have our center works since 1994 in peace building, peacekeeping, and conflict resolution. This a big spectrum of topics that works towards leading toward peace. But so what we had two questions to answer before starting to work. The first thing was what is the good recipe and the good ingredients, the best ingredients to have a good peace forum, to make it operational, to make to have a good impact. The second thing was how to have a quantitative and qualitative assessment of our work, and to make it sustainable. So to answer the first question, we felt that working on especially peace development and humanitarian activities nexus, working on this interconnection and interconnectedness on this side could help in all the efforts of peace building. So, and to have an African platform that is operational, through and to work on strengthening the links between policy and practice. Okay, so on this part, to answer the first question, we worked to to bring key stakeholders across humanitarian level on peace and development stakeholders to advance a holistic response to the continent's most stressing challenges. The second thing was how to make it quantitatively and qualitatively assessed, and to have a sustainable impact. So we went creating the Oswan Cycle. The Oswan Cycle is not, we are not just a convener. So we are not convening a forum for 2 or 3 days, with a group photo, everybody shake hands and everybody goes away with good, good memories. No. So we have what is before, during, and after. So we start thinking about having a preparatory, workshops. So these preparatory workshops where we bring experts and policymakers, but mostly experts in the preparatory side, to to focus on some of the topics that we think it's the ones that we are going to bring in the forum, to give us their own thoughts, recommendations, and maybe also responses. Okay, so and then we bring their recommendations, responses, and thoughts and ideas, and maybe also topics that they think it's important to shed light on in the forum. So we bring it to the forum in front of state leaders, policymakers, regional economic communities, as well as development banks, and bring it to them, start discussions between them on this, among other topics that we are preparing for the forum. And then we go to the last phase, is going with what we call it Aswan conclusions. It don't end here and by having conclusions. We go as the triple CPA to operationalize these conclusions through convening, whether convening training courses, tailor-made training courses that goes to tackle these conclusions, whether go to other workshops to bring these conclusions to the policy level with a document that could be adopted by the policymakers, and then we bring we bring these activities in the conclusions to the next preparatory cycle. So this is the continuous work that we are trying to do, to have activities before, during, and after. This is just I will give you examples, but after we go further in our discussion with our colleagues and participants.
I'm so fascinated by this, because I think it's something that the Geneva Peacebuilding Platform, we don't necessarily operate like this. We have a slightly different, what I would call interstitial programming, sort of what happens between the annual cycle. But it's really fascinating. And I find myself taking notes and already thinking, okay, Liz, how are we going to tell everybody about this? And we're all going to institute on it. My action brain is already going there. But before we get to that, I want to hear from Nick. So Nick Foster is the Co-Director General of Initiatives of Change Switzerland. Initiatives of Change Switzerland, they're the host of the Caux Forum, which is in the beautiful hills above La Clémence. So Nick, I know you've been exploring operationalization as well within the Caux Forum. And let's just start there. Can you share a little bit more about that? But then maybe help us think a little bit through how do we operationalize and build connections? So how do we sort of operationalize together, if that makes sense? And can you unmute yourself? That's the key question, because I think you're muted.
I hope so.
There we go.
So can you hear me? Brilliant. Marvelous. That's a classic phrase. Can you hear me yet? No. So thank you. I too would like to thank Alliance for Peacebuilding for inviting us into this conversation. And I also want to recognize Annika for kind of lining what I think is a very timely conversation up. I think we do need, and we're, as we come out of COVID, and Mohammed's already talked about the fact that, that's posed challenges financially to existing models. I think everything's shaken up now. So now is a brilliant time to be thinking ahead and looking at, okay, so we've done it this way for a while. Now let's try something new. Let's try something collaborative, maybe. So I'm very keen that we do continue this conversation and deepen it. With the Initiatives of Change events that we've been running in Caux, as Annika says, we have this beautiful building up a kilometre above the lake, looking out over one of the most beautiful vistas in the world. And so we've been going for 75 years, and the kind of the roots of that were all about trying to remake Europe after the Second World War. That was where we came from, and it was a big sort of kind of convergence of people from very, very different backgrounds, and that has continued to be one of the hallmarks of what we try to do. Very broad, diverse groups of people coming together to inspire, connect, and equip each other. And we facilitate those types of actions. But I love what I'm hearing from Mohammed about the very conscious model that is developed of the Oswan Cycle. And I think there's probably a lot that we could take out of that. So in one of our events, we tend to focus on the personal factors required for peace building. And so that's where this inspire, connect, and equip feature is so dominant. So there's often a blend of training, workshops, more traditional presentations. We'll have panel discussions. And because we're in this beautiful setting, we'll also have some kind of retreat style activities, including small group reflections, storytelling groups. And the impact that we've always assumed is happening, which we need to get much better at measuring, is that it's a kind of an experiential process, and that very personal experience of transformation that I think Liz talked about so well in the energizing of communities. That's what has been happening for 75 years in Caux, and we've been bringing people not necessarily from specific groups to come together, but people have been brought by others to experience what happens up in Caux. So, for example, Tools for Change Makers is one of the events that we've been running. And that brings an eclectic audience from various elements together. So there's been a Young Ambassadors program, for example, which has catered for, it's got its own training program for young people across Europe. Alongside that's been Learning to be a Peacemaker, which has been run by a Muslim cleric for young people struggling with how do you fit into Europe. And then we've had the Creators of Peace training around how to run community circles. And normally there's a topic as well. So in 2019, when we had our last live session, that was about rebuilding trust in Europe. And we'd have, experts and keynotes and activists coming specifically to tackle those kinds of topics. But since then, rather than standalone annual events, a bit more like, I think, the Oswan Cycle, the team's developed a programmatic approach, and that's been pushed by COVID. The circumstance has been that we can't run face-to-face. We can't use this beautiful building up a mountain. So we're going to try to do much more online. We're doing it throughout the year. It changed the model of how we prepare drastically. But we've recognized that it's really good for participant engagement and keeping and maintaining participant engagement. So you're moving from participant engagement into kind of alumni management, and how do you build community? And there's something really lovely about that. And we've got a lot of experience of that over 75 years. However, building the interpersonal trust required for peace building is different online.
Yeah.
And it takes longer, and the kind of the rich incidental or chance conversations over coffee or a meal don't happen in the same kind of way.
No.
And that's often where you discover not what is discrete and different about people, but actually what's more common, what's similar, even despite your diversity. And we've asked people to kind of do stuff together that will enable them to have those incidental conversations. And now those kind of technologies like open space try to capture that way of working. We've had it in our DNA for 75 years, and we're really proud of that part of what we do. Online, it's really difficult. It's really quite difficult to do that. So, I mean, to be most effective, I think, for sustaining connection and taking peace building beyond the conversation and into the community, we need to be doing both. We've got to have a blend of the face-to-face where the deeper connection can happen, and we need to be doing the online community building and taking part. So to try to answer at least some of your question, Annika, about how can Fora work together? How do we operationalize this stuff? Mapping where people can have those kind of face-to-face experiences, where people can then connect again around specific subjects that they're really excited about, and mapping that across the different fora, I think is one of the ways in which we can start to think about how does the work across fora start to make more sense, and how do we start to tackle specific issues. I mean, we've got the co-dialogue on land and environment, which we've been running for about 10 years now. We were ahead of the wave to kick off with. Now everybody's talking about peace building in the environmental sector. And what are we sharing? I mean, comes back to Liz's point. How are we sharing that stuff? Yes, white papers have been written. Yes, we've done some of that work, but we're probably doing that in isolation, which is, it's an inadequate way of working. And it's certainly a wasteful way of working because there's so much duplication happening.
Yeah.
And then, we've what was the other one I was thinking about? Oh, so we've got incredible programs that have been running in Eastern Europe for the last 30 years. There's a program called Foundations for Freedom that has been running there. And now we're in the face of these incredible tensions between Russia and Ukraine. There's so much to be learned from some of the people that have been there, and they can bring that, they can both benefit from and bring benefit to other fora. So sharing of the alumni as well, of the communities of practice that have been built over time, that might just be on a Facebook page. I mean, when I first started doing this 10 years ago, the small groups that would share would always get together and set up a what would now be a WhatsApp group, but was then a Facebook group. Yeah. Those things still, they continue. They're there, but do we tap them well? Do we take them on further as effectively as we could? I think probably we could do more.
I feel pretty confidently that we could all be doing a lot more, especially to connect with one another. I think that's one of the challenges, and it's interesting. We've now had, I think, maybe 4 or 5 of these Peace Forum network meetings, and the refrain has slowly grown of we need to coordinate more. So first of all, audience, please, if you would like to, start to place any comments, questions in the chat. I do see a couple in there. I do have a question. Before I get to the chat, though, I have a question to come back to Liz, which has been now coming to me as we've been listening to the counselor and to Nick. And Liz, I'm wondering, one of the things you mentioned that we should talk about, and I think is important, is about the failures as well. And I wonder, I'm really curious to get your take on sort of clearly there are failures that we're not collaborating better, but I'm curious about how you see the obstacles. How do you see the obstacles to our network better collaborating in the way that we know we need to and that we want to?
Okay, so I'm going to be really honest. Part of it in some ways, like, we're all in competition, right?
Yeah. And
there's only so much resources. So I think there's a competition piece of it. We might be looking at it, through a, sort of that siloed lens, right? And so there's, that's also a big issue around promoting other people's stuff, or, showing that there's cross-pollination. We're also super busy, right? And there aren't enough resources to go around. So I think that that's part of it as well. Yeah, I know. For me, those are really the two. People might have good intentions and want to do it, but they just don't have the time or the resources. But I mean, to say that, the competition, I think, is huge.
Yeah. It is interesting. So the Geneva Peacebuilding Platform has traditionally been a very small shop. For the longest time, it was one person with an assistant who would come in seasonally to help with the Geneva Peace Week. And a couple of years ago, it shifted and we added staff. And I slightly bullied my way into getting off of the Geneva Peace Week portfolio. And I think only because my staff time is towards community management. Can we even chair Peace Forum Network meetings? My colleague Danson is phenomenal and does way more than I even understand how a human can possibly do in 40 hours a week. But I don't think that he could do that. Do you know, I think that people who are working on Peace Fora or who are working on programs within our organizations, unless they're explicitly devoted, part of their job is to community engagement, community management, community building. I totally agree. I see that sort of resource scarcity in terms of time as a huge influence on why we don't collaborate better. I mean, we all have such positive intentions about it, but it's really hard to actually make that time. So, Mohammed or Nick, do you have anything to add on that, or just sort of what are some obstacles?
Yes, yes. Thank you, Nick. I want to add on what Liz have been saying about competition.
Yeah.
We have to think us as convenings. The conveners should work as that bring together people that are working in fields that are interconnected. I'll give you an example in this, just to make sure that there is this kind of competition is not, if I would say, valid. We thought that people that are working in financing peace or in peace, and security is totally, distant from people that are working on financing climate change finance. You understand me? So we went to an exercise to bring together both sides. Why don't we go for financing, climate finance for financing peace? So how can we bridge the gap between both sides? So no competition between them, but interconnection and synergy of work. This is a kind of example that we thought to get away this kind of competition, because yes, people are competing, the people are working in the same field, the people are urging for finance from here and there, but why not working together? That's why I'm telling you about humanitarian peace and development nexus. This can bring can go bring the competition to the minimum level we can have. The second thing is, how can we make our forums as to lend our platform to others?
Yeah.
For example, I'll give you another example. Last week, we had a retreat, a high-ranking officials retreat on Somalia, post-2021 Somalia arrangements. We understood, and because we are looking around, and because Somalia was one of the main, and the Horn of Africa is a very important region in Africa that we are focusing on. We felt that, stakeholders, the UN, EU, the European Union, and the P5 are now in a process of discussing the future of the African transition mission in Somalia. UN Security Council mandate for the AMISOM will end in 31st of March 2022. So everybody is rushing up to finalize something to have to have a clear vision about the transitional phase. We said, why don't you come to us? We will give you our platform, to speak, to have in an informal manner, in a retreat between between all of them, okay, in we were just moderating, their discussions, and then because AU, for example, the African Union was speaking with the Somalian government. The EU, the European Union, and the P5 are waiting to see what's going on. We said, no, let's bring them together in the transitional phase of the discussions, because we are in the transition, because afterward there will be the phase of finalizing the mandate of the African Union Transition Mission, and going to New York with this, whether it will be accepted by the Security Council or not. We said, no, let's bring them all together now. So I'm telling you two things now: how to provide a platform to others, our platforms to others, and the second thing, how to bring, make the synergies and interconnection between players and and different stakeholders.
Yeah. You had I think you hosted a session at Geneva Peace Week around the climate finance, and it was really fascinating.
Yes.
I think it was recorded in case anybody wants to go looking for that on the Geneva Peace Week website. But I think it's a really good point that we often operate in these silos. I think one thing I've noticed too is that we often kind of speak different languages, right? We all kind of have our jargon and our piece of the pie, and we don't often sort of break down these concepts in a way that we can actually communicate it to others. Nick, do you want to add anything on this?
Yeah, I've got a couple of thoughts on here. I mean, I think in some ways, a bit as Catherine's been putting into the chat, and as Liz has kind of highlighted, one of the things that we could be looking at is less about the competition and more about the complementarity of what we do, and that will require a decent mapping of who's doing what and why and how, and trying to avoid cannibalizing that and just adopting all of those practices, but actually supporting each other in making those things work. And having done quite a lot of industrial partnership development, that's precisely what you do. Is you need to map out who's got what skill, how they're going to achieve that, and how do you create realistic and rightful expectations of each other. That is the kind of process that would be quite good to employ across the fora. I think that would be a really interesting exercise as well. How much time and effort can we put into that? Annika's point about capacity is still relevant. I think that's the resources piece is a very salient one for most people. That's a very important piece. We've been looking to, because we have a reputation for being quite good at community building in the activities that we do. And so this last year, we supported the CCHN, which is the Centre for Competence in Humanitarian Negotiation, do their first World Summit. And they came up to Cairo and they did their first World Summit from our building. We helped them with design, with a man called Bhav Patel, who Annika will know because he does quite a lot of work with the GPP as well. So we're trying to share. I mean, this is coming back to Liz's point about how do we share the way in which we design things, the way in which we focus attention on output and how we're going to make an impact at the end of the day is very much about design. So we've been sharing design activities, and we were supporting CCHN's attempt to pull together humanitarian negotiators and peace builders, and build a new community of practice around that. And that's been very successful. They're going to be doing a regional activity this year, but may well come back to doing another World Summit in the future. But there's new kind of models being built. But I think what we need probably to take our kind of selfish lens off building our community, and starting to think about networking networks and building that kind of cross-sector networking of networks in order to enable people to skip through and find the areas that are most relevant to them and most supportive for them. And that might be to come and do some kind of retreat type work up in Caux. It might be to join Mohammed the Oswan Foundation to really start to drive forward cyclical programs of development. It might be to join the kind of the Geneva Peacebuilding platform, to work with the UN in Geneva, etc., etc. I mean, I think what I think would be very interesting would be to work out what that would take to do. I mean, Catherine puts on she suggests that if we had 1% of what was funded in the US for global working, that would make a massive difference. That would make a huge difference if there was some finance made available to do what Annika's doing, which is trying to connect and lubricate the wheels of partnership across the fora. I think that's enough.
Yeah, I wrote down. I think Catherine jumped out. Otherwise, I would ask her to share a little bit more. But I genuinely wrote down her 4-point plan because I think it's brilliant, and I think it's one of those examples where it circles right back around to where you were, Liz, which is it's this idea of resources, right? That we need a little bit more of a resource base for a community management initiative across the network as a whole. And then each organization does need a little bit of staff time of at least one person to dedicate to it, right? You could hire the foremost experts on communities of practice. And if the actual organizations who are participating in it don't have staff time to dedicate to it, then it doesn't matter. Everybody needs to, put in a little bit of energy. I'm writing down, I'm now on my 3rd page of notes out of this conversation, because this is more to us. I mean, this is more than, again, this is talking about operationalizing, right? These notes and these ideas actually will then hopefully be operationalized in a way. So again, thanks. Craig, hi. It's nice to see you in another life.
I know.
How fun.
Craig.
Great. And thanks for the convener's recommendation. That is also a really good one. I'll add that to the list. Yep. Also, yeah, thank you, Maurice, for putting that in. If anybody wants to speak up, if I can't hear you, please just chime in. On that, though, I would love to move to another question, which is, we've talked a little bit about collaboration and obstacles to collaboration, but I did want to circle back around and talk about impact and how we measure impact. I think that's one of the other sort of key questions that we haven't quite landed on yet as an informal network and as a community. So I'll ask this as I give you all a little bit of time to collect your thoughts. But the kind of key question here is, how do we measure impact? Sort of how do we think about what is the impact of Peace Fora? Do we measure it on a collective scale? I think, Nick, we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago about, is there value in sort of aggregating a collective impact? Does that do something different? I don't know, maybe if I can start with you, Councillor Kandil. I know within the Oswan Cycle that you have talked about the qualitative and quantitative. So yes. I wonder if you have examples and you could tell us a little bit about how you measure impact with the Oswan Forum.
Well, measuring the impact, it needs to, we need to be more focusing on topics. I mean, working, so that's why when we go through what we call it the Oswan conclusions, we take it one by one and try to operationalize it, and then we go to see the impact of it. I'll give you an example, and we worked with the Nigerian government. We felt that working on I go for another one, which is with the Red Sea region. During the second and the third Oswan, during the first and the second Oswan editions, we had a very important discussion on how to build cooperation in the Red Sea region, how to make it collaborative, and how we can have a peace building efforts there on collectively. So we felt, why don't we go operationalize this by maybe having, training courses that goes, directly to the official and policymakers. So we worked on discussions on this. We had course in this implementation, strengthening the capacity of the African and the Arab states in analysis and conflict analysis and resolution of conflicts. So this is one of the things. So we go to one item, try to have activities on it, and then see the impact of the activities. So we went on conflict prevention and conflict analysis and resolution. We tailor-made training courses. We brought officials from the Red Sea governments, and then we went monitoring and to see how was the impact of this training course on their work in their fields. This is one of the things. The second thing, in the preparation of the third edition of Oswan, which will be in next May, we thought that we have to draw lesson from the Nigerian experience in combating the terrorist ideology and extremism. So drawing lessons, see what's going on there, see what do they have as setbacks, problems, and try to give them some recommendations, not from our side at CCCPA only, but from the forum itself, to initiate discussions and discussion during the forum between experts and bring them some ideas. So we went for a field trip visit to Nigeria. We went with a team from our side, from CCCPA, that are experts in preventing extremism and radicalization, extremism leading to terrorism. So we went there. We went having a visit. We saw stakeholders, grouping camps where the defected terrorist groups and terrorist members are, grouped in. We went to see the programs of de-radicalization and the screening program there, to analyze it, to see with a holistic view the policies made by the Nigerians. Okay, and we went to discuss this policy and strategy with the partners, with the UN, with the European partners of Nigeria, to see how they are seeing this strategy. Okay, and to define the gaps between them. Okay, and try to, now we are in the phase of putting some recommendations and bringing the whole experience to the third edition of Oswan to have more profound discussion on it. You understand? So this is how we're trying to make a qualitative and quantitative assessment of our work. Not just having recommendations that are put in reports, but going to have it in activities and then bring it back to discussion.
And it seems also really grounded in very concrete and specific issues. I think that's really a key. If you have a group, you can really sort of zoom in on specific aspects of it and follow up. I think that's a big key.
Yes.
Thank you. That's really illuminating. Nick, can I come to you to talk a little bit about impact? Do we have a question from the audience? Oh, okay. We had an unmute from the audience. Feel free to type it in the chat if you want to pipe back up. Nick, over to you.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, one of the things that we've been doing a lot more recently, and would be fascinating to have an exchange with Mohammed and with Liz to look at the theory of change that kind of underpins the work you do. And I think an exchange of theories of change would be quite an exciting way of looking at how we do different things. So, for example, we are very much of the kind of the belief that personal change is a prerequisite for sustainable change, systemic change, and even social development. So you have to start with yourself. You've got to start with at that kind of level. Now it's very, very grassroots. But what Mohammed's doing is he's going in at a kind of governance level and he's going in at a social level. And they're doing the nexus between those 2 points, the governance and the grassroots at the same time, which is, I mean, it's a more comprehensive, holistic, to use the word he's employed before. It's a more holistic way of approaching things. You need leverage, you need money, you need some of the things that we wouldn't have to be able to do that. But this is where collaboration might actually become really exciting. So I think an exchange on the theories of change would be quite an interesting way of approaching that. We are starting to employ a principle-focused evaluation, which is Michael Quinn Patton's way of thinking about things, and it's less about problem focus. So it doesn't have to be quite so thematically oriented. Hang on, I've actually tried to, let me try and drop something into the chat about it. I was going to do that before. There we go. There's something about Michael Quinn Patton's principle-focused evaluation that enables you to talk about how much you're actually satisfying those principles that you stand by. And it's not necessarily about, there is still qualitative and quantitative measures that are employed by that type of action, but it's more about how much you fulfill the principles that you're trying to achieve than it is about, a specific problem being solved. And it's quite an interesting way of looking at it. But to speak to Liz's point about aggregated data and how could we put data together? We'd have to have something that we are commonly using in order to make that possible across Fora. I mean, we couldn't, if we're comparing apples and oranges, and maybe we're always going to be comparing apples and oranges because we're doing different things. We've got different theories of change. I don't know, but I think the conversation about how do our theories of change meet each other, how do they compare with each other, and how do our principles that would start to help us, I think, elaborate some of that and understand a bit more about whether or not a mapped process or a plan, if we were thinking about participation, how someone participating in the Oswan Forum and then in the Alliance for Peacebuilding activities and then to come to Caux, what would that do? What would that journey feel like? What would that journey actually achieve for someone?
Yeah.
That I think would be an interesting exploration.
Yeah, or how do we sort of play to our strengths? I'm curious. Yeah. I mean, we did a little bit of a poll at the beginning of the session just to figure out, some of you have come in since, so welcome. Just to kind of figure out how many of the folks in the audience are more Peace Forum organizers and how are more Peace Forum attendees. And it looked like we had more Peace Forum attendees at the beginning. I'm curious, though, I do have a hunch that many of you work within the nonprofit sector or within the government sector or within a sort of social impact sector. And so I'm curious if any of you, I mean, feel free to put it in the chat or raise a hand or sort of just unmute yourself and come on in. But I'm curious if you have this is a pernicious issue with sort of the nonprofit world that we have not landed in the same way on sort of impact evaluation and metrics. So please do feel free to come in either in the chat or unmute yourself with any impact evaluation ideas or resources. But if nobody unmutes themselves, I'd love to hear from Liz on this. How do you think about impact? Impact and measurement at AFP.
Well, I mean, I think for the conference, we put out a survey, right, to ask people what did they like, what they didn't like, what we could do better next year. I mean, so that's, you're looking at the output of the conference, but not, what's the impact or the outcome of it. So I think that's one aspect of it. Yeah, and I mean, I'm, if anybody else has any ideas of what, of how we really think through how you measure it, we're open to ideas, but I think that's really where everybody is.
Yeah, it's so interesting, right? That sort of, I think this connects perfectly to Nick's idea too about the theory of change, is that the more that we can sort of clarify that, I know we sort of take steps as a group to exchange that information. But one thing that I found that I had not, my job is always an adventure, as is all of ours, but is that even if I can collect all the information, if I can get Oswan Forum's theory of change, if I can get Caux's theory of change, if I can get PeaceCon's theory of change, who's going to take the time to read all of them, right? Like, how much time do you know what I mean? How this is where it just comes back to sort of that time question, and also figuring out what is our sort of common goal. We know that we want to collaborate. We say that we want to collaborate, but what would an actual sort of concrete goal coming out of it? Is there, I'll just give a quick example, and then I want to maybe come for a final round to all the panelists around that sort of so I'm giving you your warning to think through this question, which is, what could you envision as a sort of common goal across our network? What do we have in common, and what can we collaborate on? But before that, I'll just give an example, which is the other hat that I wear is as a community manager for a community of folks working at the intersections of environment, climate, conflict, and peace. So exactly as Nick had said, that intersection of climate change, environmental degradation, natural resources, conflict, and then peace building. And as a nebulous group of professionals in Geneva, we have about 200 people in Geneva and a bit beyond who are working around these issues. And if I just say sort of, let's come together and have monthly meetings and have a nice chat, some people will come, but most people won't. Instead, if we put a goal on the horizon, for us, it's the Stockholm Plus 50 conference. So it's the 50th anniversary of the Stockholm Convention. If we set a common goal of, in 2 years, we'll start in 2020, in 2 years, we're going to Stockholm and we're going to influence environment policymakers around peace and try to streamline conflict sensitivity and tools around peace building into the international environmental architecture and international environmental policy. That goal has been our North Star, and everybody's doing their own thing in their own place. And these are practitioners and these are researchers, and everybody's kind of wearing their own hat. But having that concrete common goal of, this is kind of the direction we're all going in, it's actually been really helpful. And so this is maybe an invitation for us to do some soul searching as a network as well, of what could we have in common. Is it a policy goal? I mean, clearly our goal is peace, but what can that concretely look like? So my example is over. Liz, I will start with you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example. You're talking about a really concrete that we can be working on together. So that's, I think, really important. I think, we did talk about the mapping, right? And one of the things we did try to look at this group is we did that, right? We mapped out who was doing what, during the year. This was going to be back in early December, but it happened to fall when they announced the Democracy Summit. So we had to move it to January. So now it was like the first one in the year. But what do we, looking at what's coming next, and it doesn't have to be everybody. And this is what I've said to you, Annika, right? We just need like 4 or 5 of us to get together and say, yeah, we want to coordinate this year. And I think Catherine put it in there, like what worked, what didn't work, what was the aha moment? What do we want to take forward into the next, the next one that comes up? Is there something we want to keep pulling that thread on, right? That needs to keep happening instead of like everybody throwing out okay, it's like, Groundhog Day again. Like what are the RFPs? Like, what ideas do people have? We did that with the Pearson Forum. We were doing a lot on technology, and we reached back into them to say, how do we continue this? I think a lot of it is around, and you said it's kind of the problem, or what's the thing you're going to work on in 2 years. Just taking the what we learned here, like a couple of the aha moments. I think Catherine said that in the chat. The frameworks research, right? Yeah. And saying, okay, guys, this is how you can apply it. How are you going to apply this? What's the coming out of here, I think one of our aha moments was the research and everything about how do we tell our story better? How do we do a better job at that in talking about the active piece of it, right? Okay, so now how do we take that into the next forum and do something with that? So we don't have to wait 2 years, I guess, because that can be the goal. And like I said, we don't have to have every forum on board. You build it with 4, then everyone will want to do it.
Yeah, that's really the thing. You kind of start where it's strongest. The literature on communities of practice is absolutely fascinating because you really need dedicated commitment from 3% of your community, and that pushes everything else. I could go on about that for a long time, but I won't. So, Nick, over to you.
I think I agree with Liz. I think if there was one thing that we could really effectively do together, it would be about success sharing. And I think that comes out in very, very different ways from different groups. And in some ways, that's the exciting part of it. I mean, one of the things that our measure of success in the past has been how many people go away and start an initiative or grow an initiative when they've left what we've done with them. And then how many people return and how many people take leadership into the future and start to kind of grow in that direction. We've used those as litmus tests for success. And, I mentioned Creative Peace earlier on. That came out of a conference 30 years ago. It's sustained for 30 years. It's got Peace Circle work happening in 60 different countries. There's incredible grassroots, mainly women meeting to actually pull together the different communities inside a city to build peace. And it's a lovely, very proactive, very easy to do training program. So we've got some lovely case studies of success that would be fantastic to share, of how these things have and can grow out of either a single event or a much more kind of strategically structured program like the Oswan Cycle. So, I think amplifying scalable solutions, looking at what communal training is available to help, generally build peace and generally think about promoting the success of these types of activities would be a really good way of, I believe, starting to build trust and reduce a little bit of the competition, look at complementarity versus competition into the future, and see how we could support each other as we've tried to do with the CCH. We're far from perfect. We've got very little capacity, so I'm not trying to trumpet us. I'm just trying to share some of the experiences we've had as we've tracked along. But I'd love to see some of those things happen.
At the very least, we have an incredible grant proposal that is being developed in this session right here. We have everything we possibly need. Councillor Kandil, if I can come to you on the question of sort of what do we have in common as a goal that we can collaborate on?
Well, actually, I think we have to be more practical. We have every one of us have his own list of priorities, annual list of priorities. So what I think it is important is to share these priorities between each other and think about what is common, 1 or 2. We have to be realistic. And then let's work on these two items, two topics together. Together means we can have one joint activity. We can give some, visibility to each other. I mean, lending my platform to you and your platform to me, and then the third thing is to share the lesson learned from your course of, practicing what we agreed upon as priorities to each other during the year. At the end, I feel we will have our own impact. Eh, the impact, I mean, a collective impact from our side on, on the policymakers, on the communities, on, stakeholders. You understand me? So this is how I think of making it more realistic and more practical, if I would say.
Yeah. One last question for the audience, and I would love to see what you have to say in the chat, which is, what do you see as the priority issues? So if we start to take out those priority lists, I can tell you what the Geneva Peacebuilding Platform, what we see as priorities this year. I mean, you've been attending PeaceCon. You've seen a lot of what the Alliance for Peacebuilding is centering as priorities for this year. But if you can, just type in the chat. It'd be interesting to see sort of what do you see as the urgent priorities within this field. So I'm just going to actually be quiet here for a minute and let you chew on that and then see what we come up with. I don't dare mute myself though, because I couldn't unmute earlier. Gatherings oriented toward young people. I like that. You just went to one of those last week, didn't you, Councillor Kandu? I think there was a youth forum. Yeah.
Yes. We went with our experience to the International Youth Forum, the World Youth Forum that Egypt is organizing every year, and we felt that bringing youth and women to peace building activities and efforts is very important, and we think that from our side in Oswan Forum we draw this lesson, and we will focus on it in the third edition also, with some activities and thematic discussions on women and youth role in peace building.
It's the issue, and I see, Angela, you've mentioned that as well, women and participation in these dialogue sessions, also dialogues between diverse religious groups. We see these as the common priorities. This is now my, I guess, third or fourth year working in this field, and they've been the common priorities every year. I'm still young in it, but it's because these are the priorities that really matter. So I'm just taking note of all of these, and I see one from Craig Moore, sharing best practices and technologies for convening online and collaborative learning. We've moved a lot of our online convening to AirMeet, which we love. And also some Wonder and still use Zoom. Wonder is also very cool. Different tech for different purposes. I couldn't agree with you more on that. And more on what we need to know that we don't know. Identifying those kind of blind spots. This is wonderful. All right, I'll give one more minute in case anybody wants to put a last kind of priority in the chat. Better use as I write this down. All right. Any closing thoughts? Liz?
Sorry, I was just writing notes from the chat.
Yeah.
No, I think that's, for me, I think we need to really get 4 or 5 of the fora this year to say, all right, we're signing on to this. What are we going to take to the next one? What messages are we going to be having, similar messaging, and make sure this thread is connected to at least 4 commit to it, like at the top. Because if we can't do that, then, then we're a community of practice, and that's okay too, right? But at least be clear about what we are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've written down Catherine's agenda. And so we get 4 or 5 of us on board and we just kind of go down the list. Absolutely. Councillor Kandil, over to you. Any kind of closing thoughts on what happens next?
Well, we have to talk more to each other, continue this kind of experience and this practice. It's important because it give us all, the sense of what's going on ground, because each and every one of us is having his own field. So having a sense of what's going on around is very important, from your side, from Nick's side, from Liz's side. So we have a perspective that is a wider angle. We have we have to discuss more with each other. We have to think about joint activities. Joint activities is very, very important. It have a quick impact, a bigger impact on, if pragmatic, I would say from my side, yes, it would give me a good visibility, a good impact. So we have to work together on joint activities.
Yeah.
What else? And the list of alumni. I'm very interested in what have been said by Nick, because we think the alumni is and going deeper in our contact with them give us a good example of monitoring and evaluation, because you go for a training course I went with Nick for a training course. So I go through all the experience, sharing the experience with Nick about what have been done with the knowledge that Nick have received during this training course, and how he was implementing it, and what is the impact of it in his community. So working deeper on this alumni list is very important also.
Yeah, to help us really measure and kind of hone in.
Yes.
And then, all right, Nick, we are at time, but I give you the closing minute.
Why, thank you, Annika. I'm not sure we've heard enough from you yourself, actually, but there are a couple of things I think would be really good to concentrate on overcoming. And we've talked a little bit about obstacles, but there are 2 that are really clear that we've always struggled with, one of which is more prescient now than it has been, which is data poverty, those people that can't engage because they don't have data. And another one, of course, is language. And and I sit here in complete ignorance because I'm not very good at multiple languages, but I do think that those 2 things are things that we need to tackle, and I'm sure there are really clever ways of getting around it that we could share. Again, it might be one of the successes to have a look at.
Yeah.
But those things. But I agree absolutely with what Councillor Mohammed said, and with Liz's challenges as well. I think we do need to do something concrete. We need to put something together. Thank you.
I've been particularly inspired by this session. It's really, we've kind of set an agenda, and I think we have there's enough enthusiasm to be able to build out of this group. So I really appreciate that so much. I'm going to close it here. I will put a little plug for those of you interested in environmental peace building. There's an entire international conference on environmental peace building that will be online next week. So it's just called the International Conference on Environmental Peacebuilding, and I can try to pull up a link in the chat. But I just wanted to say thank you so much again, Councillor Kandil, Nick, thank you so much, Liz, also Maris and Sarav from the Alliance for Peacebuilding. Your help has just been tremendous, and thanks also for creating this space for us to have this conversation. And thank you to our audience here. I've loved watching your comments in the chat. It's been great. So I will land it there, call it. It's only 2 minutes after. I'm in Switzerland, so we have to try to be as close to on time as humanly possible. All right.